Hello and welcome to another Thursday interview here on Viking.TV with me, Anne Diamond. And this week we're celebrating Vikings' Nordic heritage and looking at the influences from Scandinavian history and culture that have touched the whole world, as well as taking a closer look at the life of the Vikings. Well, my guest today has been digging deep and hard into that culture, quite literally. He is a culinary archaeologist. He specialises in the period of history between 793 and 1066 AD, popularly known as the Viking Age, when the Norsemen undertook raids and expeditions to colonise and trade throughout Europe and North America. Now, if you've ever walked along on deck 2 and visited the Viking Museum on board one of Viking's ocean ships, you would have appreciated the incredible navigational and sailing expertise of those Vikings and the way they left their mark on the various countries they visited. But what exactly is a culinary archaeologist? And what do findings tell us? Well, let's ask my special guest today, Daniel Serra, who joins us from his home in Sweden. Hello there and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Well, that's the big question, really. What is a culinary archaeologist?
Well, I usually see myself as I'm researching not just the ingredients or what people were, what finds do we have of food, but also trying to recreate what people were eating, trying to find the whole context of food, and in the end, cooking it. So I'm trying to recreate the taste and the culinary experience of the Viking Age.
But when you are doing your archaeology, when you're actually digging around, I mean, what is it that tells you about the food? The food is obviously long gone. What's left to be able to tell you anything?
Well, I'm actually not doing the digging myself, but yes, I'm looking at remains such as we can find bones. Bones is you find them little around several places. You throw them away. You have the remains of bones. You can find remains of grains, seeds. We'll also give you some hints on the ingredients into the food. But like I used to say, if you just look at the ingredients, you just find the grains, the seeds, the bones, that can make up almost anything. It's like to empty it out in a cookbook. You can reassemble it just anyway. So I have to look at also into cooking equipment. What were they used to cook things? What is the context of everything? Where is it found?
So if you go along to an archaeological site, then obviously you will occasionally find things. I mean, where you knew people were settled, you will presumably find old cooking instruments, as you said, utensils, feeding, eating instruments and things like that. It must be a treasure trove when you do actually find something.
Oh yes, it is because sometimes people find really interesting parts. Well, you find new seeds that you haven't, not new seeds, but seeds you haven't seen in this context before. Like in nearby here, in where I live in southern Sweden, they recently found the seeds of parsley in a pre-Viking Age dig. So that gives some extra idea of what I can use when cooking. And also sometimes people find food crusts in vessels, and there are people doing analysis of them. So they look into what kind of fats was there, what kind of remains are there. There's even in Birka, there's been remains of breads found. So small pieces of bread being burnt with the burial, and that's also really informative. But most of my archaeology is actually experimental archaeology. So I take all this information and try to cook it in the way they did cook at that time to see, is this possible? What will be the result of adding all these small pieces of information together?
Yes, I suppose cooking and eating tells you a lot, if you can, it tells you a lot about family structures, about Viking society, whether they ate together or separately, whether they ate in large numbers, feasts. I suppose we think of the Vikings having great big feasts.
Yeah, you see anything. You can really find, well, this is difficult to say, of course, because this is also this kind of material that is transient. You don't find the events of dinners as such. You can find small hints and pieces, and you also have to use literary texts and get the information from saga material, which is written later, but can give some hints. You can find the layouts of the sites of the houses. But yes, you can find ideas of how they were eating, who were cooking stuff. Both you can find, for instance, you can find some cooking implements in male graves and some in female graves, so that can give you some hints. Social structure, you can find different kind of food in different kind of sites. So large manorial house, like in the one in Leire or Lofoten, have a different setup of food remains than you would find in a trading place, like in Kaupang or Ribe or Birka.
Yeah, why do we think of Vikings as being very fierce, people who travelled all over the world, or a great part of it anyway, looting and pillaging and conquering, if they weren't completely like that? Why do we have that impression?
Well, that's mainly because that's the impression you have from the people they encountered during these, the people encountered during, from the small part that are raiding. You have the descriptions of people going raiding. Of course, when you are being raided, that's how you will describe them.
Of course, yes.
And you will have a certain amount of people do go out abroad for pillaging, for raiding, whereas I would say most of the people during Viking Age who were traveling were mainly traders. But you do have this, there will be a bias in the written history, of course.
Yes.
So that will influence our sense, and it's also been, it has been inflated during 19th century, national romantic era. You will inflate certain archetypes in the regional history.
Yes, I suppose it's more exciting, isn't it, painting them as terrible conquerors rather than just traders. But they were clearly great sailors, because they sailed vast amounts of miles, didn't they?
Yes, they did. Mainly it would actually be, they did sail, and they were good at boat building. For the time, they had a good boat building technique and good sailing technique. But also one had to remember that most of the sailings, or most of the sort of sail routes, were done in daily routes, in daily stops. So you go by day, then you stop at night at shore. You cook your food, you sleep there, and then you continue.
Yes.
So that's so the idea of them traveling vast distances. Well, you have that, but
in stages.
Yeah. Whereas when you go to Greenland or across Atlantic, yes, that is, or from Iceland as well, that would be a bit further. But yes, and that would be a bit more difficult.
Yes.
Of course. And you have descriptions of the in sagas of people are starving on the ships. People are going, when the first travelers going to across the Atlantic to Greenland, they do suffer from not having enough food and not. So it is somewhat of good luck as well. Sort of, but yes, they were good sailors, of course. Yeah.
But when they stayed and settled anywhere, how did they live? Did they build houses? Did they live in family groups?
Yes, I would say so. Well, depends on what stage of settlement, of course. I would say first settlers on Greenland, then you would probably have first a small group coming over. But then yes, of course, you would have family groups. You would build houses. And what you can find in the evidence is that people are mostly domestic. It's not hunter-gathering culture. It is a domestic. You grow animals, you grow your grains and crops, and that's what you use. And you fish, but that's what you use for a living. So.
I was going to say, you mentioned earlier the museum at Lofoten, is it?
Yep.
And I think there, in that museum, you actually get reconstructions. You can actually see how they would have lived. There's the exterior of.
No, that would be later, I think, because that's
Right.
a Danish flag. So that's.
Oh, of course, yes. I should have spotted that. But the interior, again, you see the sort of way they would have lived inside. And I must say, it looks rather nice. It looks rather cozy.
It is. That's from Lofoten, yeah. Yes, it is. It is quite nice. And then, of course, in Lofoten, you would have most likely you would have lots of people living inside this large hall, whereas in other places you would have smaller buildings, and the large halls would have probably been more for sort of a retinue of the greats of the chieftains. But in Lofoten, it would be a bit of a different setting because of it being far north, and you have the winds you have to take care of. So it's a bit different.
What about you? How did you become a culinary archaeologist? How did you even get started?
Well, it started off being a student and doing, I studied archaeology, and I was curious to what were people eating at the time. So I started off doing ancient Roman food. I studied classic archaeology. That was my first venture into archaeology, and started looking at apicius and sort of interpretations of classic Roman food.
Roman.
Yes, I started with Roman, from ancient Rome, because I did classic archaeology and was sort of curious. What did they eat? What did it taste like? And well, of course, it has to do with me, like that. I like food, so of course this connection between I enjoy food and I was curious about what did food look like at the time. Also, when I was a student, this is when I started learning how to cook as well. So this is my self-learning process, and I incorporated my interest in that.
So, I mean, when you look at Viking food, how would you even know where to start? I mean, obviously cuts of meat or fish or something like that. But then how can you know how they cooked it together?
Well, we can't know. We can do fairly good estimations and guesses or interpretations. And this is how I do. I work with, as I said earlier, I start with the finds. That can give us some idea of what goes into the food. Then you have to look in cooking equipment. Okay, what kind of cooking equipment do they have? They have mainly cauldrons, pots made of stone, of iron. They do have some spits, and that's more or less it. They do have some ovens in the south by the end, and you also can find cooking places. So that gives you some idea. And then you have to look at, okay, so this is how it was.
Now, if you look at the pictures that we're showing now, can you describe what those are?
I can't see the picture at the moment.
Oh, there's something rather large on a skewer.
Can you put up the picture, because it's okay? Yeah, so this is the skewer. The spit there is it's a roasting spit. So that was heart, and this is based on a saga. So this is from the saga of Sigurd the Dragon Slayer.
Oh yes.
And in this is a whole epic. It's a whole tragic epic, this saga. So the saga it's not about Sigurd the Dragon Slayer. The saga is about the gold from the dragon. And the gold carries with it a curse. So Sigurd slays the dragon. He takes out the heart and eats it. And when he eats it, he roasts it firsthand. And you can see there's a very nice Swedish runic inscription that shows how he's roasting the heart on a spit.
Oh.
So that gives me an idea on how the heart should be cooked.
Yeah.
But later in the same saga, and this goes on for a few generations, the gold goes from one person to another, carries with it the curse, and there's always this morbid, awful things happening to the person who has the dragon's gold. And in the end, the gold has reached King Atle. King Atle is supposedly Attila, or some Central European king. And he's marrying the daughter of the king from whom he stole the gold.
Yes.
So she's not too happy. She wants revenge. So she waits a few years, carries his children, and then there's a feast, and he's being served red mead in golden plated new beakers, and lamb's heart tasting of honey. And then after he's eaten and drunk, she will come up to him and say, well, you didn't have, it wasn't just any beaker, it was your son's skulls plated in gold, and the blood was mixed in the mead. And the lamb's heart, well, it wasn't lamb. And then she killed him.
Gosh.
But the interesting part of the story, well, this is interesting, it's very morbid, but it gives you, this was one of the few instances in one of the sagas can give you an actual taste. This is honey-coated hearts.
Yes.
So we know that the hearts are very high class, high-end food.
Yes.
You use honey, would be expensive and exclusive. Use the heart, which you only get that few from an animal. So this is something, and we know the cooking method. So this is, I pair this together in order to make a dish. I can't say this is how it was made, but this is a probable way of making it. I'm using ingredients that we know, well, we have find of these. We can say that this is probable or plausible. There's different degrees of interpretations as well. So this is for that one. The other picture on this image, I think it was some kind of, I'm not sure what.
Some sort of stew or casserole, it looks like.
Yes, I can't see here. I think it could be porridge as well.
Oh, it could be, yes.
Yeah, and porridge would probably been quite common. It is described. It's a good way of cooking barley. Would be savory porridge. And here I can get some inspiration or information actually from Anglo-Saxon medical texts. We have medical texts from the 8th, 9th century Anglo-Saxon Britain, and that can give us some idea on how to combine things. I also use medieval sources to see how do they use, for instance, how do you use cauldron? And you will notice there that most of the time you will simmer things rather than boil them. If you roast something, which would be rare, you do it beside the fire, not over it. And it's all these limitations also gives you some idea of what will be the end result.
Yes.
So
you clearly, you as you said at the beginning, you don't just study this, you recreate it, you cook it yourself, and you taste it.
Yes.
Yeah. Is it tasty?
It is. It is. Although you sometimes have to have the context of being outside eating, because I don't use a lot or even any salt in the food, and that is a bit difficult for us to adjust to. It's easier if you cook it outside in the right environment. Although I use salted butter, because that would probably be one way of keeping the butter. Using meat that's been salted and smoked, cold smoked, because that would be a way of keeping the meat. So you would use quite a lot of things that are being preserved.
Yeah.
And that's also one way of looking at it. You also have to look at the seasons, of course.
We modern humans seem to thrive on 3 meals a day. Did Vikings have 3 meals a day? Do we know when they ate?
Well, yes and no. It's not entirely clear, but we do know that it's later on, at least we talk about the day meal and the evening meal. So that's 2 meals. You would have that. It will be more pronounced in Christian Scandinavia, because then you would follow the Catholic medieval tradition of not having breakfast. You will not eat before Mass. But it seems like you would have these 2 meals: dagvad, kvällsvad. So these would be the 2 main meals. Yeah. Then you could probably have something in between. And as in my cookbook is called an early meal, because it's based on one stanza in Havamal where it says that if you go traveling, if you're going to visit a friend or someone, you better have something to eat before you leave home. Yes. Otherwise, you will arrive hungry and you will not be good guests that way. So you will better eat before you leave.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But also that can give you a clue that, all right, so you have this sort of information that you should eat before you leave. that means that perhaps it's not that common to eat the first thing you do when you get up. So that you can get more information from in between the lines sometimes.
Yes, I know that you lead workshops on cooking on an open fire.
Yes.
It's a particular technique, is it? And what are the flavors like? Do you talked about salt there, but do you add things in all the time? Oh yes, and that's an oven rather than an open.
That's an oven. Yeah, that's based on a find from down here south in Scandinavia. It's rather small. It's probably mainly, we don't really know the uses of it properly, but I think it's used for roasting, for drying stuff and malt, greens. But because most of the bread we find from Birka at least are just fried bread. It's fried on a small pan rather than, or on stone rather than in an oven. But in the south, yes, I would think you would start making the baked bread as well.
Yes, and I guess wherever they did settle, they would have built those ovens. What, out of mud?
No, not really. It's just in the south.
Oh.
So north of Oslo, I don't think we have any finds of ovens at all. So this is southern influence, and it could be, one possibility is that it is connected to making bread with rye.
Oh.
Because you don't have rye in the further north. And rye bread is what you use first. Usually you will want rye bread to be used with sourdough. And that could be better baked than not fermented bread at all.
But again, you've reconstructed these sort of ovens, and they work, do they?
They work, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, you can. I made regular bread in them. And this is from a medieval site, so this is a medieval oven, but it's the same profile, same way of working. And in that one, I made pies and baked some other stuff. So I made some pies in that oven.
Yes, I imagine the best way to understand historical food culture is to cook it, recreate it yourself, and to taste it yourself.
Of course, you have to taste it. You have to get the idea of what the flavors were like, and also the texture and the looks and the smells to get further into it.
Yeah, I bet it does smell good too. I can imagine it smells good.
Give you and it is because one thing we've lost as a modern human. You talked about modern humans. One thing we have lost in cooking or eating today is the texture, sort of holding the food, eating with your fingers.
Yes.
Because prior to the Renaissance, we didn't really use forks. We used spoon, knife, and fingers. And this is, you have to start thinking differently when you go further into history, or further to our time.
Yes.
Actually, using the fork is a huge revolution in how you cook and eat. It's just after we get the fork that we start getting whole pieces of meat on your plate. Before that, you would have it cut up.
Yeah, I mean, do you think food tastes better actually if you feel it?
Yes, in a way. Yes, it does. It gives you another extra sense to it. You can feel it as well. The tactile senses of the food. Yes, of course, it's different.
Do you think? I mean, from everything you've said, they're good basic ingredients.
Yep.
So would we consider the Viking diet healthy by today's standards?
I think so, yes. Well, it's also a question, well, it's perhaps a bit too limited in scope. We would probably want, especially around the year, a bit better variety. Because, to be honest, in spring and early summer, it would be rather scarce. You would have very limited resources. And that makes food being limited to a few. Well, you add some new greens, but mainly you would have one or two main ingredients that you eat repeatedly. And that will give some deficiency to you.
Yeah,
it would be.
Yeah, how did they preserve food, or didn't they? I mean,
they did. They would have. They would have drying would have been one of the main ways of preserving things.
Dry.
Well, your ships go to Lofoten, you can see the dried fish, the stockfish,
Yes,
hanging there.
I was going to ask actually if the ships go to those sort of areas, what would people see? For instance, at Lofoten, what is available to see?
Today, you mean, if you go to the different areas where you have your ships? Well, of course, in Lofoten you have the museum. You can also see the hanging fish. That would be a good example, which dates back to the Viking Age. We even have finds suggesting that dried fish were exported to England in the Viking Age.
Really?
Yes, so it dates back, and it's described in many sagas. So we would have the dried fish in different areas of Scandinavia as well. You would import it and you would eat it. So that would be, I would say that would be one of the major. Then you have the reconstructions you have in Denmark. You have several in Sweden as well. So you can find all these reconstructions of the historic period. Food-wise, it's more difficult to find, except things like that, like the dried fish and.
So when you wrote your cookbook,
yeah,
has it actually got recipes in it? So if
yes.
anyone bought it, they would be able to actually recreate a Viking dish.
Yes, definitely. And we have, when we were doing the cookbook, we're thinking, well, this recipe should be able to be done outdoors and also at home in your kitchen.
Yes.
So you can get the taste of it, even if you don't have a Viking settlement in your neighborhood.
Yeah, I know your cookbook won an award, didn't it? Which must be very exciting.
Yes, it was nominated. It was nominated to an award, but still, it was it was one of 3. I think it's for the nomination for the international culinary, or I can't recall exactly what it was, but yes.
So anyone watching now, if they did want to have a go at a Viking recipe, what would you recommend? Easy but authentic.
Easy but authentic. I would say a savory porridge. That would be my go-to. This is everyday food.
Yeah.
It's quite easy to make, and it gives you an idea. Or perhaps there's another recipe in the cookbook, which is also porridge, but it's a bit even more sort of alien to us, but it's really good, and people tend to like it. And it's a oat porridge with kale. Savory porridge is always a good start. It gives you a really good insight into Viking Age cuisine. It's a staple at the time.
What are you using to make the porridge?
I usually use barley, crushed barley. But there's one porridge which is oats and kale, which is based on this is based on a myth or a description of Odin and Thor meeting up. Odin is disguised as a ferryman and says that he could ferry Thor across the river, and Thor says, "No, I'm good. I'm not. You don't need to take me across the ferry," because I think he suspects it's being Odin. And then Odin said, "Well, you come across, you can, I have some food to share with you." And he said, "No, I'm good. I had some herring and oats before I left home." So that gave me an idea. Okay.
Yeah.
So I based this recipe on a Danish 17th century recipe, and looking into ingredients, changing out bits that would not be used, and cooking a simple porridge of oats, ramsons, kale, and butter. And this marries perfectly if you have a smoked fish to it, smoked herring. So this is something I can use to introduce people to Viking Age food.
What about drink? What did they drink?
I would say beer. You would drink soured milk. You would drink whey.
Milk. Whey.
Yes, whey and buttermilk.
Yeah.
Whey would be difficult because that's really high in lactose, so I can't drink it anymore. You would drink water if you have good water source nearby.
Yes.
And that would be the main drinks. Then you would have and weak beers. You would make beers when you make beer, you would take the malt and make another batch of beer with the malt you already used.
Yes.
So really weak beer.
Wheat.
Then you would probably have, if you're so for feasts and if you're rich, then that's when you would serve mead. So mead is not a common drink. I would say that the braggot, which is a sort of a beer which you brew with some honey in it, would have been more common, like a way of saying, well, I'm serving mead, but in fact you're not, but you can fool a lot of people with that. But so beer, whey, buttermilk, and to some extent water as well, and soured milk.
Yeah, soured milk.
That's
you have that.
Yeah, would still have it today in Sweden. There is filmjölk, we call it.
Oh.
And you will also, I would say that what you find in Viking Age sagas and in cookbooks from the 13th century is called skyr. It's not the same that is served as skyr today. Now I know many Icelandic people will be upset, but so the modern skyr is set like you do with cheese, with rennet. Whereas the Viking Age skyr is often described as being runny. So you hit the sack with, well, there's some saga where someone is carrying a sack of skyr, I think, and it's being hit with a sword, and it will pour out.
Yeah.
Which means it is not settled. It's not set. It is running.
What sort of people come to your workshops then? Are they other history students, a bit like yourself, or people just do it for fun?
For fun, yes, definitely. It's depends on also where the workshop is. So now the next workshop I will be holding is at the medieval festival in Visby. There's the medieval week. I believe your ships goes to Visby as well.
Yes.
Yes. So week 32 is the large medieval festival there.
Really? And I gather that you've even demonstrated in the United States, haven't you?
Yes, I did. So
because there's a very large Norwegian contingent.
It is Norwegian, Swedish, and Danish. I was in the Midwest, so you would have it in that area. So I was invited to the Norwegian Höstfest in North Dakota. But also made a few, so I did a tour there. So I went to Minneapolis, and different areas in Minnesota and different areas in North Dakota. So yeah, so it would be, I've done a few trips to the US, so that's also different. There you would have people interested in the heritage and in the Scandinavian background. In Sweden, you would have people interested in history, reenactors. You would have people just interested in food coming to the workshops. And in Norway, I even been doing workshop at a metal festival, heavy metal festival in Borre, which has a great mix of reenactors and heavy metal fans.
Yeah.
And you would have that mix in the workshop as well. So you would have people being dressed up as Vikings, and other people's being there for the heavy metal concerts. So it was a great mix of. So you will have people, very different kind of people showing up at the workshops.
Well, you're continuing the Viking tradition, really, aren't you, of traveling all over the world and spreading the word, I suppose. I gather you also had another book, didn't you, which was more medieval than particularly Viking. And you called it?
It's based on a Danish manuscript from the 13th century.
Yeah. Well, I gather you called it A Source of Little Value.
Yes. This is a book.
Why did you call it A Source of Little Value?
It is one of the recipes in the cookbook, in the original cookbook. This is following a manuscript. So when doing the recipes, we found that this is a really nice name. It's a sort of very mellow name. It's a source of low value, and it is described as a sauce or almost a soup that you serve to people when they're traveling.
Right.
So it's popular among traveling men, it says, and it is very simple. Just stock, some wine, some red leek, and some red onions. I mean, red onions, beef for pork stock, and some wine and parsley, and that's it. And
just enough to keep you going.
yes, and if you serve it on a piece of bread,
Yeah.
according to medieval sort of traditions, that would make it a soup.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
is it right you've got a business called Memento?
yes, Memento past food.
Memento past food, not fast food.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, and so this is, and again, this is all about going from exhibitions and museums and doing demonstrations.
Exactly. So doing demonstrations, doing talks about food, doing lectures, workshops.
Yeah.
And well, haven't done that much yet, but also giving, being able to be consultant if someone needs help with medieval or Viking Age recipes.
It's an extraordinary business to be in, isn't it?
It is. It is. I mean,
it is absolutely fascinating. It's, as you said at the beginning, you have to. It's not just about what you find in an archaeological site. It's also about piecing together all little bits of knowledge from, as you said, from literature, from those old poems, those epics, because they all mention food, because food is important to all of us, and it tells you a lot about society.
Exactly. So that is why I'm interested in it, because not only, well, at the start, my interest was because I like food, but then also I realized the importance of food. Food has an impact on society, and it is also a really good tool for teaching history.
Because, yes, reconstructing it and eating it, yes.
Exactly. You eat it, you take part of the historical context, and then you can start talking about, well, the sort of ideology of food, the context of food, what people were thinking when eating, how did it cure all the ingredients, who were cooking. So you get everything, sort of everything of history can boil down into food if you really want to. And if you're looking in later periods as well, a lot of our explorations were based on food.
Yes.
The sort of the rush for going across the globe was more or less a result of spices being harder to get at.
That's right, the spice trade. Yes, of course. What do we know about who did the cooking? I mean, was it women who did the cooking?
Well, it's difficult to say, actually. Of course, we find a lot of cooking equipment in female graves, and probably, yes, female women would have done much of cooking. But we also find both pots, spits, and other cooking equipment in male graves. You would have descriptions on, and of course, when you're traveling and when you have the trading groups, which were mostly men, you would have men cooking as well, and you probably would have men cooking at home as well. However, what women were, I think, where you would find the most sort of obvious gender division when it comes to food is two things. It's serving or presenting the food, because most of the things that sort of you associate with high-end serving of food, that you will find in female graves. And brewing.
And brewing.
Brewing has been a female trade until the 15th century.
Is that right? I didn't know that.
Yes, so it's just when you start doing, when it starts getting industrialized in the 15th century, that's when it sort of turns into male tradition. But before that, it is more or less exclusively female, except for monasteries. But yes.
Yes, true. Yeah, but so I mean, you've obviously studied and written a lot about medieval food culture and Viking. Is there any other period that you're looking at the moment?
Well, at the moment, no. I'm really looking at doing a translation and expansion of this source of little value. So
yes, because at the moment that's only available in Swedish, I think, isn't it?
Exactly. So that's my main goal. It has taken a bit longer time because it was written in 2009, and I have gotten lots of information since then. So, and I also realized that we were not completely right in a few of the recipes. They need to be reworked, and also I tried to add quite a large bit of information about the food culture in Scandinavia at the time. So it's expanding the book quite a bit.
Well, I suppose you're always learning, aren't you?
Yes.
everything, every bit of literature you come across, every time you go to a site, and when you just talk to people, I guess you're always learning.
Exactly. And for instance, one of the things I've learned things from modern cooking that I incorporate and realize why things were done that way in the medieval period. Since, of course, I'm not I haven't gone to any culinary education. Should be honest with that. So sometimes I can find some try to read up on it, but sometimes I find new snippets of information about, for instance, about what happens when you beat meat, for instance, when you're making sausages.
Yes. And
many medieval recipes would have you pound the meat in order to make the kind of mince. But it helps if you cut it up and pound it, you will get collagens out, and it will be a much better sausage. So so I get snippets of information, and I can then realize why it was used that way in the medieval period, even if that was not rational. That was not how they were thinking about it, but it had some empirical experience that's yes.
Did Vikings ever write any recipes down?
No.
Oh.
There's nothing written except for what you find in the sagas, what you find, and it's written later. The only thing that the only written sort of from the Viking Age, we know it's from the Viking Age or even earlier, is runic inscription that just says ale and leek. So I made a sauce with that.
Yes. But it is like building a jigsaw puzzle, fitting all the little bits together. Yeah, and I imagine when you find something new and it makes sense to you, it must be very exciting indeed.
It is.
Yeah, and I'm also told that you're working on a PhD at the moment as well.
Well, that's not really correct, because I was working on a PhD like when I was doing my cookbook, or just before I doing my cookbook, and it's been sort of slumbering since then. So I'm not working on it. It is there somewhere and might be revived someday when I got
when you've got some time.
Exactly.
Where are you off to now? I mean, are you going anywhere on any special investigations during the summer?
Not any investigations. I might try to do some cooking experiments. I want to do some. If I got some time, I will try to make some experiments with making walnut oil from this 13th century Danish cookbook. But honestly, I think most of my summer will be doing events. The next thing, I am preparing the event in Visby, where I do both a cooking class and a lecture.
Well, he's busy enough. It's been so good of you to give up your time for us today. Thank you very, very much. I must say, what you do is extraordinary, really unusual, but absolutely fascinating. I can understand why you must get so sort of fixated with it. But enjoy your food is all I'm saying.
Thank you very much, and have a good meal yourself.
Yeah, thank you very much for telling us all about it. And as you mentioned, Viking guests will get the chance to visit various places that you mentioned. Are Into the Midnight Sun itinerary visits the Lofoten Islands, and you can go on a visit of something that's been reconstructed as a Viking homestead, believed to be the home of a local chieftain. On the scenic Scandinavia itinerary, you can go on Life of the Vikings excursion, which takes you to the museum. On the island of Djurgården, and from Aarhus in Denmark, you can visit a replica of a Viking longhouse at the Fyrkat Viking Centre. So there's plenty if we've whetted your appetite. So I'm going to leave you now with a taster of just one of those cruises. Oh, and I ought to tell you that my guest next week is Professor Julian Dowdeswell, who's the former head of the University of Cambridge's Scott Polar Research Institute. And he'll be telling us all about his long career studying the polar regions. But right now, let's have a look at the voyage into the midnight sun.
Experience the wonders of Norway and the British Isles on this 15-day journey with Viking. In fascinating Bergen, you'll have plenty of time to explore its intriguing history with an overnight stay. Then it's on to the majestic Geirangerfjord, where rugged beauty is found around every corner. You'll sail the Inside Passage and cross the Arctic Circle to Tromsø, with its Arctic Cathedral and Polaria Museum. Honningsvåg and the dramatic North Cape come next, followed by the craggy peaks of the Lofoten Islands, home to ancient Viking traditions. On Scotland's Shetland Islands, meet some of the world's friendliest residents. The Orkney Islands bring rugged coastlines and windows into ancient times, while Scotland's capital, Edinburgh, presents an intriguing collection of medieval and neoclassical architecture. Your Viking journey concludes with a sail along the Thames River, through the barrier and into London's maritime Greenwich, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, where you'll enjoy an overnight stay so you can take in this regal city and all its splendour.